My name is Jenna Spinelle. I'm a writer, a podcaster, a journalism instructor. I wear lots and lots of different hats. I'm based in State College, Pennsylvania, east coast of the US. I host and produce a podcast called Democracy Works. It's part of my day job at the McCourtney Institute for Democracy at Penn State. We've been making the show for just about 3 years now, and I've learned a lot about the industry along the way. I also have a background in journalism, and I've written a number of articles about the podcast industry for outlets like the Bellow Collective and Better Marketing, presented at lots of other podcast industry conferences as well. So we'll go through some of those resources at the end here, but you can find me on Twitter at Jenna Spinelle. So if you want to start a podcast in 2021, you are not alone. There are more than 1 million podcasts in Apple's directory currently, with thousands of new shows being added every week. So lots of people have caught the podcasting bug, and with good reason. There's tons and tons and tons of money coming into the industry. You might have heard about the deal that Joe Rogan made with Spotify last year. The New York Times is acquiring podcast talent left and right. They bought Serial Productions, the company that made Serial, and S-Town, and most recently Nice White Parents. So there's lots of interesting mergers and things happening. Amazon just bought the podcast production company Wondery. So there's lots of opportunities. I think people are seeing ways to cash in, and at the same time, there's this long held maxim of podcasting that anyone can do it. All you need is a smartphone. And while that is technically true, I think that the increased competition from all of these shows that are out there and the money coming into the industry means that while, yes, it is technically still as easy as it was 5 or 6 or 8 years ago to start a podcast, it's much more competitive these days, and it's harder to really make it lucrative or figure out where it fits within your overall goals and your overall business strategy. So these things are not necessarily deal breakers, but they should just make you think a little bit and be a little bit more conscientious about how a podcast, like I said, fits in with your overall goals for your business, or what you're working on personally, your passion project, all of those kinds of things. So I put together a framework of 5 questions to ask before you press record on your first episode or decide to go down the path to starting a podcast. We're going to talk about, what do you want to say? How do you want to say it? Making sure that your show doesn't sound too much like a commercial. How to check to see if somebody else is already doing what you're doing. And finally, how you can determine what's in it for you versus the time that you invest putting into it. And I can tell you that podcasting is a lot of work. It is a grind to put out episodes, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly or daily, or whatever your publishing schedule is. It does take a lot of work, and you should go into it with a clear-eyed expectation of what you want to get out of it and what your involvement in it is going to be. So the first thing, like with any new project, you need to figure out what you want out of it. What do you want to say in this case? Podcasting is a super niche medium. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to have a podcast where I talk about anything and everything, whatever's on my mind. You can really only get away with that if you already have a big following or big reputation. Joe Rogan can do that today because he's been in the space for so long. He's already a known entity. But if you're just somebody coming in cold, you don't have any type of following you're bringing with you, why would people spend their time listening to your random musings about life or the world or what have you? Your podcast should inform people or entertain them or give them something otherwise of value that they can add to their lives. What are they getting for the time that they're investing listening to you? So if you think about it like a Venn diagram, you can think about, what are your strengths? What are the areas you're interested in or passionate about or curious about? And then how does that relate to the world at large? What listeners might want to hear about? Who is your ideal listener, and what does that person want to hear? You should really have a clear understanding of what the answers to these questions are before you start down the path of making a podcast. For us on Democracy Works, we knew that we wanted to have an outlet to bring our academic research and expertise about democracy and related topics to the general public, get it outside the ivory tower, so to speak. We knew that we wanted to talk to scholars who were doing work in the field, but maybe didn't have an outlet to reach the public. We knew that we wanted to talk about political issues, but in an educational, nonpartisan way. So those were some of the goals that we've had, and they still, today, 3 years later, remain the North Star for how we think about the show week in and week out. And then, once you kind of nail down some of those top level ideas, you think about how you want to say whatever it is you want to say. What type of format is your show going to have? Is it going to be an interview show? Is it going to be a solo podcast? Are you going to have a roundtable with a co-host or several co-hosts? Each of those is different. You could also go a different direction and do a narrative style podcast like Serial, like This American Life. But it's really going to depend on, whatever your topic is and what's the best way to convey that information to your audience. And you might have to play around with it, try a couple of different things, think about what your strengths are. Are you a natural conversationalist? If so, maybe an interview show would be best for you. Do you have already a good rapport with a friend or colleague or someone else who can serve as your co-host? If so, then maybe the roundtable format will work for you. Again, it really depends on your unique circumstances. There's also, as I said before, I think more and more pressure, more and more competition to have shows that sound good. If you're going up against a podcast that has the resources of an Amazon or the New York Times behind it, they can afford to hire teams of people to make sure their shows sound good. Now, I don't think anyone would expect a solo independent podcaster to have quite the same level of expertise or of production value, but you shouldn't just be like recording things into your phone and throwing it up on iTunes either. There should be some editing, some production value, some structure, some thought to how the episode is going to take shape. And you're probably going to need to practice unless you already have experience in radio or in public speaking or things like this. You're going to need to figure out what your on-air persona is going to be and how that should come across. And I think a lot of podcasters learn the hard way too that they're not as funny or engaging as they think they are. So you might need to spend some time working through those things as well. And then, listen back critically and ask other people to listen to your episodes. If you think of it like a pilot from the TV world, get some feedback. Is this something that people would choose to listen to or add to their existing roster of podcasts that they subscribe to? And then, no matter what type of show you're making, it can't be a commercial. This is true for brands and organizations that launch shows. It's true for if you are a coach or other type of entrepreneur. It can't just be 30 minutes of a hard sell for whatever your latest product is. You have to find ways to give informational value to people that complements what you might provide. It's kind of like a top of funnel sort of activity if you think of it that way from a sales perspective. And at the end of the day, it's really all about the listener. It's not about you. Hopefully you will get some benefits out of podcasting. I know I certainly have. It's a really great way to connect and engage with people that you would never have a chance to otherwise. But it's making the show is about providing meaningful content to them, not about, lifting my own ego or anything like that. So it's really important to keep the listener in mind at all times. That's something that's easy, again, to lose sight of as you get into that weekly grind of putting out episode after episode. And then what's the landscape like? Does someone else already make the show you want to make? If so, there's not really a ton of value that I see in trying to compete with an already established product. So survey the landscape very thoroughly. Look on the podcast apps. There's a great search engine called Listen Notes where you can type in a topic and see what shows are already out there on that topic. And then once you've done that, think about what you can bring to the table. How can you differentiate from what's already out there? What can you maybe borrow from what other people do and make your own? But you might find that somebody else is in fact already doing the podcast that you have in your head that you want to make. So be open to other options. Maybe you try to get yourself booked as a guest on that show, or maybe you find some way that you can collaborate with existing players in the space. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a zero-sum game or an all or nothing of, okay, you either have to make this one thing or you can't do anything. There's lots of gray area. And as I said, that the podcast community is very open, very welcoming, very collaborative. So you might be surprised if you send a cold email to a podcaster out there, they will most likely respond to you and be open to hearing your ideas or thinking about ways that you can help each other out. And then finally, what's in it for you? What are you getting out of this? While it's true that your listeners are and should always be your first priority, you can't be completely out of the picture. There has to be some kind of balance there, right? You are putting in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to make a podcast happen. So you have to also keep your eye on, is this serving you? Are you getting value out of this either personally or professionally, or is it helping you in some way? One thing that I've certainly noticed in my experience in podcasting is that it lets you punch above your weight class, so to speak. So as I mentioned, I work for an organization called the McCourtney Institute for Democracy at Penn State, which is a very small, new organization within academia. We're only a team of 4 people. It's only been around for a couple of years, but our podcast has gotten us in communication and in collaboration with organizations across the US that are far bigger in scope than we are and have much more clout, much more of a reputation. And we would have had no reason to reach out to these folks if it not for our podcast. So podcasting can be a great way to open doors, both personally and professionally, get you in front of people who might be your mentor or your role models, or the people you look up to. So it really just gives you a calling card, or a reason to reach out to folks to say, hey, do you want to be a guest on my show, or is there some way that we can work together? And then, in this age of social media, having a podcast also gives you lots of content that you can repurpose. There are apps like Headliner where you can take your audio clips and convert them into short video files for Instagram. You can take your podcast audio and convert it to video for YouTube. Or you can just record your audio session. You can put it on video, just like folks like Joe Rogan do, and just have that video go out to YouTube as well. You can use the transcript of your episodes as content for blog posts or newsletter articles or other types of written content. So it really is more than just an audio medium. If you step back and look at that more holistic view, you can think about other ways to repurpose the content and get some more mileage out of all that hard work that you're putting into, scheduling interviews, or recording episodes if you don't do an interview format, or putting your narrative storytelling together. How can you use that content in other places to also serve your personal or professional goals? So those are the 5 questions you should think about. So again, what do you want to say? How do you want to say it? Is it going to sound like a commercial? Does someone else already do it? And what's in it for you? So that should give you some good information to chew on as you're planning out your goals for the year. Just a few other caveats and points to close on here before we get to questions or other discussion. So you're not going to have as many listeners as you think you will. I think a lot of people see the success of shows like cereal and think that they're going to have millions of downloads right off the bat. But the podcast hosting company Libsyn puts together monthly snapshots of the number of listeners across the board, and the median number of downloads per episode is 140 after 45 days. And this changes slightly month to month, but it's usually somewhere around this 140 number. And they always say that if you have more than 140 downloads per episode after 45 days, you're better than half the shows that are out there. So those numbers are much, much smaller. And you might be thinking, why would I put all this work into it just to have 140 people listen? But if you are planning an in-person conference or event, if we can all kind of conjure back to what those look like, if you had 140 people show up, you'd probably think that that was a resounding success. And in the podcast world, it's that number of people giving you their attention on a regular basis. Those are your hottest prospects, or the people who are most likely to be interested in what you're doing. So, it's really more about quality versus quantity when it comes to thinking about your downloads and your number of listeners. You can see on down the line, a lot of the shows that we hear about that show up on the top of the Spotify or the Apple charts, they are not even the top 1%. They're like the top 0.01%. There's a whole other landscape out there of shows that you don't hear about as much. Just like any other kind of medium, things that are already popular tend to be the things that get the most attention. It's kind of a paradox of media, and it exists across books, movies, TV, whatever it is. We only hear about the biggest players in the space, but there's a whole other ecosystem out there of which you can certainly be part. And just to lift a line from Jay Acunzo, who I follow a lot for marketing advice, it's when it comes to listeners for your show, it's not about who arrives, it's about who stays. So, once you pull people in, what can you do to turn them into subscribers and loyal listeners and people who look forward to hearing you every week? It's so weird to get emails from people that say, yeah, I look forward to your show every Monday morning when I'm walking my dog or on my commute, or, you're part of people's lives, which is really, really special and something that you shouldn't take for granted. So I think, a lot of our marketing these days is about like blasting things out and getting, 1 million retweets or what have you. But podcasting is a much more intimate medium. You're literally coming into someone's ears on a regular basis. And so, you should think about what you could do to maintain the trust that you build and the trust that people give you by letting you into their ears when they listen to your show. Some of the resources that I mentioned earlier, these are all great sites to learn more about podcasting and about the industry and about what's happening and trends and how to get started with your own show from a technical or from a nuts and bolts perspective. The Bellow Collective is a group of people who do, I would say, podcast commentary or podcast criticism from like a critical theory perspective. Better Marketing talks about how to find audience and how to grow your show and things like that. Discover Pods covers the industry as well. They do a lot of great creator profiles. Podcast Movement is the world's largest community of podcasters. So show creators helping each other out, sharing advice and resources and guest swaps and things like that. And then Timber is a site that covers how to make podcasts that people really want to hear. How do you make that show that's going to go viral and really capture the zeitgeist? Timber talks to people who have done just that through their shows. So just to kind of review here, again, make sure that you do your homework and you have a clear understanding of who you want to reach and what you want to say to them and how your show is going to bring them value. Because again, at the end of the day, it's not about you, it's about the listener. And once you decide to make a podcast, if you do, you need to commit to it and put out content on a regular basis. Pick your distribution schedule and stick to it. You can't just put up an episode every time you feel like it. Think about any other medium that you pay attention to. If a TV show just put up episodes whenever they felt like it, how could they build an audience, right? That's why you don't see Netflix or Hulu or those types of platforms doing that. And you have to commit to producing high quality content that people actually want to hear, and ask for feedback, both when you're starting and from your listeners along the way. But in the end, if you put in this work on the front end, you'll go into your recording process with a game plan and an outline for how you're going to use your show to help achieve your goals, and hopefully have a little fun along the way as well. I haven't talked as much about how fun podcasting is. Like I said, I've met so many great people, and it's really great to know that you're making an impact, and that you are helping people learn something or think about things in a different way. And it's I think the right mix of low barrier to entry but high potential for impact in the end. So thank you again for your time and attention this morning. If you have questions, you can feel free to send me an email or find me online. Happy to help you out however I can. And as I said, my podcast is called Democracy Works, which you can find at democracyworkspodcast.com, or by searching Democracy Works wherever you listen to podcasts. So I see other folks in the chat here. Sorry, I couldn't see you while I was presenting. But yeah, happy to answer any questions you have about podcasting, or about starting your shows, or to hear about ideas that you have. Yes, I do have a Medium account. I'm at J Spinelle on Medium, and I will put that in the chat here momentarily. If anybody else has questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat. And I believe this is also being recorded, so if you missed the presentation, I think you can access it later on. But I'll put links to all my profiles in the chat, so you can catch up with me after the conference as well. So here, yeah. So Clara, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. That's a great question. How narrow or large would you recommend the subject to be? It's definitely all about the niche. Podcasting is a very niche medium. I would say the more specific you can be, the better. That makes it easier to find and target your ideal listener. If you can think about if your show is about knitting, for example, you can go and find communities of people who are knitters, or who really enjoy that activity, figure out where they hang out, where they talk to each other, and then go and join those communities and promote your show that way, and find an audience that way. If you're just talking about anything that's on your mind, or if you don't have that specific focus, it's really hard to describe your show to people, really hard to make the case for why they should listen to your show versus the literally millions of other podcasts that are out there in the world. Yeah, and figuring out a subject is definitely difficult. I said in the presentation, if you think of it like a Venn diagram, it's on the one side it's what you are most interested in or passionate about, or curious about, and then the other side it's what do people want to hear. And I think you're kind of getting at that there with your comment. You're looking for that sweet spot in the middle. So I would say find ways to ask people, find out what communities are already out there in the topics you're thinking about, and ask what people want to hear, or survey the landscape of shows that are already out there, and see where you can fit into that. Maybe somebody else already covers one aspect of your topic, and so you can go a different direction or find some way to build on that. As far as promotion goes, it's really tough. There are advertising options on most of the major podcast platforms. That's one way. If you do have a budget to spend, there's also lots of newsletters and recommendation services. Some of those sites that I listed in the slide deck, they write articles about new podcasts and things like that. I've had some good success on Reddit, going to different subreddits related to democracy or the topics we're covering, and really honing in on how my show adds value to existing conversations that are happening there. You don't want to be that person that just goes in and like spams your self-promotion link all over the place, but if you approach it in kind of an authentic way, there is I think an opportunity to really make genuine connections with folks, and make your show something that's part of their media diet, so to speak. If you on my Medium profile, there are several articles about podcast promotion that might be helpful to folks. So just put a couple more links here in the chat. You can find me on Twitter. If anybody has other questions, we have a couple minutes left. I'm happy to answer any last questions folks have. How long did it take to make our podcast successful? So I would say it took us at least a year to really build up our solid audience base. And that's a year of putting out episodes every week. I think we would have still been able to have similar results with a bi-weekly show or something like that. But it is definitely a grind, and you have to always be thinking about both production and promotion. And that's a tricky balance. I'll admit there are some weeks where, our show comes out on Monday and we get to Thursday. I'm like, oh man, I haven't even like posted anything about this week's episode because I'm so busy focusing on what the next episode is going to be. So that takes a while to get into that rhythm. So yeah, I would say definitely at least a year, unless you have the backing of a major company or a major production studio or some other push behind you to help get that out there. And I did put a link to the show in the chat. I'll put my email as well. Feel free to reach out if you have questions or anything else I can help you with. But otherwise, anything else? We have 1 minute left. Otherwise, I'll let you all get to your next session. So I'll just say thank you again for starting your new year with me. And I hope that you all think about podcasting. Clara, how much research per week? A lot, especially because I have an academic kind of show. Send me an email if you want to talk more about that. Happy to talk you more through the research process. But thank you all. Happy New Year, and we'll see you at the rest of the sessions. Thanks.